It's Friday, February 13th, and we're seeing a return of severe weather for the first time in a while. We saw a big stretch of some wild winter weather where we saw snow in Texas, snow in the Outer Banks, and even snow flurries in central Florida. But now we're starting to get back into that spring pattern where we start to see severe weather in parts of the southern US. We're starting off with kind of a finger like marginal risk stretching from southwestern Texas into central Oklahoma. And this is mostly just going to be for a hail threat. Now, it is important to note that that hail threat is sort of decent. We could see some decently sized hail, maybe in the realm of 1.5 inches with this. I also wouldn't rule out the chance for damaging winds. And there's also a non zero chance of a few weak spin up tornadoes also. So jumping right into it, we're going to start seeing our big storms pop off in the late afternoon to early evening hours and then going from there. But this is what it'll look like around midday. We see kind of a wave just initiated by our jet stream overspreading our marginal risk. Now, this is going to play actually a big role as this is going to kind of eat up the storm ingredients in front of those storms, this little blotch right here. So that's going to leave a lot of questions kind of. Will there be enough instability? Will there be too much convective inhibition? But probably around the late afternoon hours, we'll start to see a couple of storms in the wake of that pop up along a stationary front. Now, in this area, there's going to be a decent bit of convective inhibition, and there's also not going to be that much forcing. So there is actually a pretty decent chance of a couple of discrete cells. We see one up here, potentially south of Lubbock, that could potentially produce some hail damaging winds. These little cells that are discrete could have the potential to produce all hazards briefly. Now, the main thing that we're likely going to see with this is hail. I wouldn't be shocked to see maybe a weak spin up tornado from these. If they get surface based, that's another question of if these storms get surface based, but riding right along our boundary where all of that storm ingredients are going to be the most. That's where we're going to see the most cape and shear right around there is where they're going to have the best chance of producing. And then another area, we actually have a warm sector that's going to stretch pretty far into south central Oklahoma. And with that, we're going to see a line of thunderstorms and a bunch of little blotches in front of that as I move forward. You're going to see those start to pop up in that area right there. And those might actually have the best storm environment, all these little blotches up here. Wouldn't be shocked to maybe see all hazards, but I think the main thing with those is going to be that potential for hail and damaging winds. Not super sure we won't see any tornadoes, but that chance is going to be low, not zero though. But once we get probably a little after 3 to 4 hours after sunset, all that stuff in central Oklahoma just going to kind of turn into a rainy mess, and that is going to be done producing severe weather. Then we're going to pivot our focus back down to southwestern Texas, where we're going to see another line of storms initiate when our jet stream starts to crank. Also, when that low level jet starts to kind of cause more convergence right here, we could see those storms initiate as well. With those, it's once again going to be mostly a damaging wind and hail threat. Not a zero chance of no spin up tornadoes, although once again, that threat is going to be really, really low. And then once we get probably 5 hours after sunset, that's when the risk with that is really going to diminish. Now, our risk is actually not done at this point. This blotch right here is going to leave a outflow boundary for some storms to initiate later into the night. So after midnight in the very, very early morning hours, like 2, 3 a.m., that's when we're going to see another blotch as our trough that's kind of causing a lot of this really starts to sharpen. We see a lot more convergence along the outflow boundary as well. And then this is also when our front is going to start to move out to the east. So more forcing there altogether. That's why we're seeing that. And on that outflow boundary, these storms closest to the south are going to have the most unimpeded flow of ingredients straight into them. And I actually think there's a decent chance we could see all hazards with those blotches in the early morning hours. So maybe an early morning nocturnal threat of tornadoes and just all hazards of severe weather in general in far western Texas. Definitely want to look out for that. And then this is going to go into tomorrow's risk, which actually could be pretty big. And then this is just a look at what our jet stream is going to do tomorrow, kind of showing that play by play why a lot of the things we're seeing are happening. We can see that first yellow blotch causing that first line, which kind of goes up, clears out the environment, eats out a lot of those ingredients. That's going to play a big role in why we're not going to see a lot of storms kind of in this circle right here. And then we're going to see this red, which kind of indicates stronger forcing from our jet stream, start to overspread the area. That's why we're going to start to see some more blotches. And then why we're going to start to see that big line start to come out of southwestern Texas, as well as that blob moving into central Oklahoma as well. For that nocturnal threat, it's actually going to be a bit more sneaky and kind of harder to see from our jet stream point of view, but we are going to notice one critical thing is that we can see probably around when those storms start to fire up, look how much sharper this has got. It looked probably a little bit more wide a couple hours like this, but it really starts to sharpen out. And we can also see that this is when our front is going to finally start moving eastward across Texas for that Saturday threat. And then looking at our weather soundings, this is going to be one from that central Texas risk area. And we're seeing a lot of good things for all hazards. In this one, it's not showing as much CAPE as there probably will be about an hour or a little bit more to the east of this. But in the mix layer, we're seeing about 1,000 CAPE. I think these storms or these little blotches will have a pretty solid chance to be surface based. Would like to see it be a bit moist, though. That's one of the hindrances for this event. There's just a little bit too little moisture for things to really get going. That's one of the main hindrances, actually. And we're also seeing some pretty solid wind veering, and we even see a little curvature in our photograph. But the big thing is this big elongation right here in the higher levels of the atmosphere. That's one of the indications right here. You can see it in our surface to 6 kilometer bulk shear, why that hail threat is so pronounced by the Storm Prediction Center. But overall, we're seeing pretty solid CAPE, pretty solid 3 CAPE, and pretty solid low level shear. This is something that points to a potential for all hazards, and especially when that crashes back into that main line coming out of Texas into south central Oklahoma. That could potentially be the time when we see a peak in activity. And then this is looking at a sounding for those couple of cells that we're seeing in that really quiet area, kind of brought by not a whole lot of storm ingredients and some weak forcing, but right up along our frontal boundary is where we're going to see the best chance for severe weather. And right here, we're seeing that these storms have a pretty decent chance of becoming surface based. That was one of the questions of if that will actually happen. Still is, but much better of a chance than we were thinking probably about 12 hours ago with these being surface based. And with that, we have decent CAPE. 3 CAPE isn't that great, but decent shear, really good deep layer shear. That indicates that we're going to see mostly a hail threat with this, probably some damaging winds. And because these are going to be surface based and our CAPE isn't all that bad, I definitely do think there is going to be the chance for maybe a weak spin up or brief tornado with these discrete storms out in our quieter region. And another thing to note with these is that there is not going to be a lot of precipitable water with these either. So these will probably be low precipitation and pretty photogenic supercells. And now we're looking at the line coming out of southwestern Texas. And the thing with this one is really not going to be fueled by that much CAPE, but our shear parameters are going to be really, really solid, especially our deep layer shear. That's one of the reasons why this is probably going to be able to sustain, even though we don't have a whole lot of moisture and we don't have a whole lot of instability. That's really going to carry it, this deep layer shear, because it's going to be more of a linear mode for this line coming out of southwestern Texas. Not the largest threat of hail, but because our deep layer shear is so good, I definitely wouldn't rule it out, though. Even our low level shear is showing that we could potentially see some damaging winds out of it. Because the CAPE is so low, though, I don't think that's going to be a big risk. And I think that risk of spin up tornadoes is going to be really, really difficult to be realized. I'm almost going to say that our chance is going to be close to 0 for this line in southwestern Texas, but definitely still a strong line of thunderstorms that we definitely do want to keep an eye on. And this is going to be the final thing we look at for this forecast. This is the secondary line coming out very, very early tomorrow morning as we go into Saturday's risk out of southwestern Texas. And the main thing we're seeing with this is a pretty solid energy helicity index. We're going to see decent CAPE somewhere in between 500 and 1,000. Our shear parameters are going to be really solid around that outflow boundary. And then this is kind of a poor sounding, but a lot of the ones closer to the outflow boundary are going to show that these storms are going to have the potential to be surface based. We're also seeing closer to 60 dew points and a little bit of curvature on our hotographs along with that nice elongation. So with this secondary line, as we go into Saturday morning, very, very early Saturday morning in southwestern Texas, also think there's going to be a potential for all hazards of severe weather with that.